Hi guys, welcome to my channel Geography with Narendranath. Type and movements of sea waves. This is very important session. Must you will subscribe and like. If you are new, must you will click bell icon. Today I explain about type and movement of sea waves. Also there are the different on the basis of wave generated force, and on the basis habits, depth, seawater, on the basis geomorphic significance, and also explain there on the basis of breaking waves and on the basis of multiple causes. Definitely this lecture is very important for UG PG students. Must carefully listen. Now start today. Type and movements of the sea wave. It may be mentioned at the very outset that as regret motion of water, sea wave and currents different significantly. And when the sea wave attain the critical limits of wave height, they break and the plunging line, and where the wave fill button and the resulting surface currents move coastward together with whole water masses. Sea waves are classified on the different bases into various types as such as the first of all on the basis of wave generating force. Basically there are some division. First of all, the wind generated sea waves must common waves, and undersea there are the landslide generated sea waves, tectonically generated sea waves, and tsunami waves generated by tsunamigenic under sea earthquake. And number 5, there tidal wave caused by gravitational pull of moon and the sun. Number 6, there storm generated sea waves and storm surges to or the storm waves. And number 7, the undersea volcanic and sea waves. And second, also on the basis of depth of seawater, the deep water waves or oscillatory waves, they are shallow water waves or transitory waves and tangential waves. Number 3, on the basis of the geomorphic significance, there are the constructive waves and destructive waves. And number 4, on the basis of breaking of waves, there are the breaker waves or similarly breakers, spilling breakers, plunging breakers, surging breakers, and collapsing breakers. And also there on the basis of multiple causes, shallow waves and wind generated waves and rag waves and super waves due to overlapping of multiple waves, also known as the monstrous waves. So it's very important. Another there are the water motion in the wind generation wave. Now I explain. It may be pointed out that only the form of wave moves forward in sea and ocean through the water, and the water does not move forward. And it is the orbit of particles and decrease with increasing depth from the water surface, and with the result orbit become more and more elliptical towards sea bottom, and there is only horizontal movement of water particles. And you see in this model, and it may be mentioned that the movement of wave from forward means forwarded transmission of wave energy. It is very interesting to note that water particles while moving in a circle in wind generate and sea wave pass the energy forwarded. And such type of motion of water in sea wave is known as circular orbit motion basically. And this is very important that it is also important to the mind that water particles while moving in the circular orbit motion does not return exactly to its origin place, and rather it is slightly moved towards, because the speed of movements of water eat the half of orbit circle in the top of the wave is slower than the speed of water movements in the remaining half of the orbital circle in the crest of wave. And since the depth of orbital circle of sea waves is equal to one half of the wavelength, and the depth of orbital circle is positively correlated with the wavelength of sea waves. This is basically the depth of orbital circle of sea wave is called the wave base basically, and which is one of half of the wavelength. As the waves approach seashore, the wavelength decreases, and hence the depth of wave base also decreases, but the wave height increases. When the depth of sea water become equal to one half the wavelength, the depth of wave base touch the sea button, and sea wave fill button and their wave energy become unable to maintain the enormously grown above the heights. The wave break at plug lines and breaker lines from where the water moves. Basically, it may be conclude that there are two types. Is very important. Number one, the forward movements of wave from the wave energy basically, and orbital movements of water particles beneath of the wave. And basically forward movements of the wave form is measured as wave speed or clarity in the meter per second. The wave speed is directly related to wavelength, and longer than wavelength, greater the wave and speed, that vice versa. The wave frequency is and inversely related to the wavelength. Longer the wavelength, lower the wave frequency, and vice versa. In an orbital movements of the wave water particles basically move break and forth and up and down, and return to almost the same position from where they started moving. The wave size and the size of orbit movements of the water particles beneath also. Next, another I explain the deep water waves. Deep water waves basically the zone of the ocean is that part of one ocean where the depth of ocean water exceed to the depth of wave base, and which is one of half of the wavelength. So the wave generated in deep ocean water by winds are called deep ocean water and wave, and do not have any interaction with the ocean bottoms. And these waves are also called oscillatory waves, and the motion basically on the oscillatory waves are the same as the described above. The water particles move into the orbital circle. So next, another shallow water waves is very important. The sea wave traveling in shallow water zone where the depth of ocean water or wave base is less than 1/20th of the wavelengths are called shallow water wave or long waves. Thus, shallow water waves travel in the shallow near shore zone of ocean and touch the bottom of the ocean and say wave. There are fill button basically, and because there is always contact between the wave and sea bottom, the water particles in the such wave follow flattened and orbit, and hence there is the forward movements of water and mass. Also, such movements of waves is called translatory motion basically. And it is this category include there are the wind generated waves in the near shore zone, and tsunami waves generated by tsunami-genic quakes, and tidal waves generated by the gravitational force of the sun and the moon. Next, another I talk about the transitional waves, the sea waves between the above mentioned two categories of the waves such as the deep water and the shallow water waves are called transitional waves basically. And who is in the depth of water wave base is greater than 1/20th part of wavelength of shallow water waves, but less than 1/2 of wavelength of the deep water wave is given. And there are the depth of deep water waves d is equal to, they are greater than L by 2, and depth of shallow water waves there are the less than L by 20, and depth of transitional waves L by 20, but there are the less than L by 2. And the wave speed of above mentioned three type of the wave are variable related, such as the speed of shallow, basically water wave depend on water depth. The greater the water depth, the higher the wave speed, and vice versa. And the wavelength determine the speed of deep water wave. The longer than the wavelength, the generator the speed, and vice versa. And both water depth and wavelength control the speed, intermediate or transitional waves. Now I explain there are the rock waves, basically the occasionally and unusual or non-regular sea wave of enormous wave height are called, there are the rock waves or monstrous waves only, because of the fact that such waves occur very rarely and assume very great height and thus become very severe and destructive. They are also called super waves in the same way as the several and most destructive tropical cyclone are named super cyclone. The exact mode of the origin of the rock waves is actually not yet known, but the theoretical model have shown that the overlapping of numerous waves can produce one single moon stars waves. And now I explain there are the constructive and destructive waves is very important. From geomorphologically point of view, sea waves are divided into two major types, constructive and destructive. The low frequency wave with longer wavelength approaching the shore and beach are the constructive in the character, because they lose volume and energy rapidly while moving up the beach, because water percolate in the singles and other beach material, and thus the backwards, and other beach material, and thus the backwards is vacant, which hinder and the removal of some the material seaward, and it is thus obvious that low frequency wave help in the building of beach. And on the other hand, high frequency wave with shorter wavelength and high wave heights, basically approaching a more steeply sloping shore, are destructive in the nature, because inside of spiraling they plunge and generate powerful and backwards traveling towards the shore, and strong backward towards the sea, which come down by the beach, basically. And sargon and breakers, I explained, they are very important. Some the sea wave after being originate by powerful who is in the sea area, basically of the ocean, is technically called by the mariners, and the radiate and outward in all direction from generating sea area. The growth of sea wave in turn increase in the size and speed is controlled by the strength of storm winds also. As the winds get stronger by attaining high speed, the wind energy is transferred to the ocean surface, and this wind energy increase the height of waves, and it means wind strength, basically wind speed is strongly positively correlate with wave strength, basically size of waves, length and wave height. As the wind speed increase, the wavelength and wave height also increase. It may be mentioned that the size of sea waves. And the sea waves with longest wavelength move most rapidly, and steep wave with shorter wavelength but greater height basically, and decay more rapidly while the moving away from generating sea area. And as the waves move in shallow water of the near shore zone, and they feel bottom basically, and lose energy because they suffer from friction and destruction caused by their interaction with the bottom surface. Thus the waves being to feel bottom when the depth of water become equivalent to about the half of wavelength also. And as the wave approaches the shore, the wavelength continue to decrease while the wave height increase to such as extent that the crest of the wave toppled over, and the wave is transformed into the breaker basically. And this is very important. There are the some breakers are the three types. Number one, spiraling, plunging, and surging breaker. Now I explain. First of all, the spiraling breaker are most common type of the breakers in which water does not fall but gradually spill down the front of sea wave and form prominent forming coast. The spiraling breaker are formed over gently sloping sea bottom where there is slow rate of loss of wave energy. And plunging breaker are those in which water fall vertically and rushes and southward in the form of turbulence forming water mass, and when the wave creates become so steep and high, and then they become curling crest, and thus the wave energy become unable to support such curling chest basically, with the result they break and plug vertically. And surging breaker basically those in the wind whose water moves rapidly shoreward, and such breakers occur very close to the seashore, and spelling breakers are associated with the steep waves and are caused when the velocity in the wave crest and wave body are almost equal. Plunging breakers are caused when the velocity of water is wave crest exists, the velocity of wave body basically. The breaker of was surface after reaching that sloping bridge and return towards to the sea backwards and under two currents basically. And now I explain there are the wave refraction basically. What is the refraction? And wave refraction simply means the bending of crests of sea waves approaching seashore. The wave refraction is caused due to dragging of shore burnt wave almost the sea bottom. And why do the wave crests refract or bend? It may be mentioned that basically there are the crystalline over wave crest of shoreline almost there are the straight and parallel in deep water, but when they approach the shallow water of the surf zone they become irregular and ultimately they bend or revert due to different wave speed. If the coastline is highly irregular and indent characterized by bays and handled, there are the approaching wave crest break of headland earliest due to shallow depth of the water, then the create of the some wave who is enter the base due to the relative deeper water. Basically, and wave orthogenies are the imaginary equispaced arrow drawn the perpendicular to the coastline of sea waves, and before the wave are refract, and in other words, the event is there are space imaginary arrows or raised down and perpendicular to the crest of deep water waves are called wave orthogonal, basically, who is used for demonstrate and distribution of wave energy, and thus the energy between any two waves there are the orthogonal in the supposed to be equal along the interior crust, and thus the wave orthogeneous help to understanding of distribution of wave energy in the near shore area. And they are very important. Another aspect, wave reflection result in the formation of the lateral and long shore currents or drift, and which move parallel to the seashore. These currents are generally generated in two way. There are the when the seawater under the influence of gusty winds and strike there are the coastal, and there is mass transport of seawater parallel to the coast, and when the powerful wind generated waves under the influence of high velocity and wind strike the coast, and most of water move parallel to the coast. So there are the wave reflection basically simply means bouncing break of wave energy when the progressive wave strike the straight and coastal line of the restricted rocks, and say cliff and coastal line of the man-made and structure such as the sea wall, who is and constructed parallel to the coast to protect the land from aggressive cliff erosion. Basically, cliff diverge of area and erosion when the coast boundary waves strike the sea wall or resistant coast almost the right angle, and the wave energy is reflected break and sea-bound wave are created. The sea-bound outgoing wave are parallel to incoming coastal boundary waves, and when these two opposite waves meet, an unusually way from the greater height and usually more than 10 meters are generated. It may be mentioned that the original waves, and sometime of the combination of the two opposite waves and reflect wave and the incoming having the same wavelength result in the formation of standing or stationary waves wherein there are no actual horizontal movements of water. So in effect the water level and there are the oscillate up and down about the fixed done, and which is located near the interior. The standard of stationary wave and when occurs in bay, harbor or estuarine is called there are the sheet. So there are the thank you to all, and thank you Professor Sarvinder Singh and all professor and my audience. Thank you to all.